You lose value the moment you become too easy to reach, too easy to have. You've probably felt it before, even if you didn't have the words for it. At first, everything feels natural. You respond quickly, you show up, you make yourself available, because you care. But slowly, something shifts. The energy changes, and you can't quite explain why. They start replying slower. They cancel more often. The excitement fades, and suddenly, you're the one waiting, checking your phone, wondering what changed. And the truth is uncomfortable, almost frustrating, because you didn't do anything wrong, you just showed up too much. It's strange, isn't it? You'd think being kind, present, and available would increase your value, that it would make people appreciate you more. But instead, it often does the opposite. It makes you predictable, and worse, it makes you easy. You see, people don't always value what is given freely and constantly, not because they're bad people, but because of how the human mind works. Familiarity without effort slowly erases excitement. Access without limits removes the sense of rarity. And rarity, that's where value is born. Think about it for a second. The things you value most, time, attention, respect, they're never unlimited. There's always some form of resistance, some barrier, some effort required. That effort creates meaning. Without it, everything starts to feel replaceable. And when you're always available, you unknowingly remove that barrier. You make access to you effortless. No anticipation, no uncertainty, no emotional investment required. You become predictable. And predictable things, no matter how good, slowly lose their emotional weight. This idea isn't new, by the way. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He believed that human desire is driven not by possession, but by the tension between wanting and not yet having. Once something is fully obtained, desire begins to fade. So, when you're always there, always ready, always responding instantly, you remove that tension. You remove the space where curiosity grows, and without curiosity, attention weakens. Without attention, value drops. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it happens every single time. Now, this doesn't mean you should become cold or distant. That's a misunderstanding a lot of people fall into. They swing from one extreme to the other, thinking detachment equals power. But no, that's not it. Real value isn't about being unavailable. It's about being selectively available. There's a difference, a big one. Selective availability means you choose when and how people access your time and energy. It means you don't respond out of impulse, but out of intention. You create space not to manipulate, but to protect your presence from becoming ordinary. Because once your presence becomes ordinary, it loses its emotional impact. It becomes expected. And when something is expected all the time, it stops being appreciated. You've seen this happen, haven't you? Maybe in relationships, friendships, even work environments. You give more, and somehow, it feels like you're valued less. It's not because you're not enough. It's because you've removed the mystery. You've removed the challenge. And humans, whether we admit it or not, are wired to respond to what feels just slightly out of reach. There's something powerful about not always being there. Not in a dramatic way, not in a game-playing way, but in a grounded, self-respecting way. When you have your own rhythm, your own priorities, your own boundaries, people feel it. They sense that your time isn't cheap. And when your time isn't cheap, your presence becomes valuable. Every interaction carries more weight. Every moment feels more intentional. You're no longer just there. You become someone people have to meet halfway. That's where respect begins. But let's be honest for a second. This isn't easy to do, because being available often feels like the right thing. It feels like effort, like care, like commitment. Pulling back, even slightly, can feel wrong. It can feel like you're losing connection. But actually, you're creating space for it. You're allowing people to come toward you instead of always going toward them. You're giving them the opportunity to invest, to wonder, to value your presence. And yeah, it feels uncomfortable at first. That silence, that pause, that gap, it can mess with your head. You start questioning yourself. Should I text? Should I check in? What if they forget me? But that fear, that's exactly what has been controlling your behavior. It's what keeps you overgiving, over showing up, overextending yourself. And slowly, it drains your value. Because value isn't just about what you give. It's about how it's perceived. And perception is shaped by contrast. If you're always available, there's no contrast. No difference between having you and not having you. You're just constantly there. So nothing stands out. What changes everything is when your presence becomes intentional. When it's felt, not assumed. When people notice it, not expected. That shift alone can completely change how you're perceived, without you needing to say a single word. It's quiet power. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but is deeply felt. And here's the deeper truth. When you stop being too available, you don't just increase your value to others. You start increasing your value to yourself. You begin to see your time differently, your energy differently. You stop giving it away automatically. You become more aware, more grounded. And that changes how you show up everywhere. Not just in relationships, but in conversations, opportunities, decisions. You stop chasing attention. You stop trying to prove your worth through constant presence. Instead, your presence speaks for itself. That's the shift. You move from being accessible to being respected. But to get there, you have to understand one thing clearly. Availability is not the same as value. In fact, too much availability often hides your value. It buries it under familiarity, under predictability, under constant exposure. So the goal isn't to disappear. It's to create rhythm, to create space, to allow your presence to breathe, to be felt, to be missed, even just a little. Because being missed, that's powerful. It reminds people that you're not always there, that your time matters, that your presence is something to be appreciated, not assumed. And when that realization hits, everything changes. The way people respond to you changes. The way they treat your time changes. And most importantly, the way you see yourself changes. So maybe the question isn't, why am I not valued? Maybe the real question is, have I made myself too easy to access? Because once you see that clearly, you can start to change it. And that's where things begin to shift. What's interesting is that this pattern shows up everywhere, not just in your personal life. If you look closely at history, power has rarely belonged to those who were constantly accessible. It belonged to those who controlled their presence. People who understood that attention is a resource, and the way you distribute it determines how others perceive your worth. Take Arthur Schopenhauer again. He didn't just write about desire in theory. He observed how humans behave when something becomes too familiar. He noticed that when people are given constant access, appreciation fades, not instantly, but gradually, almost unnoticed. It's like a slow leak. At first, everything feels normal. Then, the excitement dulls. Then, the attention weakens. And eventually, what once felt special becomes routine. That's the danger of being too available. You don't see the loss happening until it's already happened. You can even see this in the behavior of influential figures throughout history. People who were admired, respected, even desired, rarely made themselves constantly reachable. They spoke less, but when they did, people listened. They appeared less, but when they showed up, it mattered. Think about that for a second. Their power wasn't just in what they said or did. It was in the timing. the spacing, the restraint. They understood something most people ignore, that presence gains value when it is not constant. And, yeah, I know what you might be thinking, but isn't that manipulative? It sounds like it, right? Like you're playing some kind of psychological game. But actually, no. It's not about manipulating others. It's about not abandoning yourself. Because when you're always available, you're often reacting, not choosing. You respond immediately, not because it's right, but because you feel you have to. You show up, not because you want to, but because you fear what happens if you don't. That's not connection, that's dependency. Real power comes from choice. From deciding when to engage, when to step back, when to give your attention fully, and when to hold it. That control changes everything, because now your presence is no longer automatic. It's intentional. And people feel that difference, even if they can't explain it. There's also something deeper happening psychologically. When someone doesn't have constant access to you, their mind fills in the gaps. They think about you more. They wonder. They project meaning into your absence. It creates a kind of mental presence that's stronger than physical availability. It's weird. Really weird. But it's true. Absence, when used naturally, not forced, not artificial, can amplify how much someone values you. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're allowing space for emotional processing. You're giving the other person room to feel your absence. And feelings, they grow in space, not in constant exposure. You've probably experienced this without realizing it. Someone who wasn't always around, but when they were, it felt different. More intense, more meaningful. Their words carried weight. Their presence had impact. That's not coincidence. That's controlled availability. Now compare that to someone who is always there. Always texting, always calling, always checking in. At first, it feels good, comforting even. But over time, it becomes background noise. You stop noticing it. It loses its emotional edge. Not because the person changed, but because the access never did. And this is where most people get stuck. They think giving more will fix the problem. More attention, more effort, more presence. But that only accelerates the loss of value. It's like trying to fix overexposure by adding more exposure. It doesn't work. The real shift happens when you start pulling your energy back. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to restore balance. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-responding. You allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. And yeah, that silence can feel uncomfortable at first. You might sit there thinking, wait, should I say something? Did I do something wrong? But give it a moment. Let the space exist. Because in that space, something important is happening. You're breaking the pattern of over-availability. You're showing without words that your presence isn't automatic. That's when things begin to change. Slowly, subtly, but clearly. People start leaning in more. They initiate conversations. They pay closer attention. Not because you ask them to, but because now your presence isn't guaranteed. It has to be experienced, not assumed. This is where psychological mastery begins. Not in controlling others, but in understanding yourself. In recognizing the impulses that drive you to overgive, to overshow up, to overextend your availability. Because if you're honest, a lot of that comes from fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not being enough unless you're constantly present. And those fears, they push you to act in ways that actually create the outcome you're trying to avoid. It's a paradox. The more you try to secure your place through constant availability, the less secure it becomes. But when you step back, when you trust your value enough to create space, people begin to feel that absence. And that feeling, it pulls them closer. But this requires a shift, a deep one. You have to move from seeking validation through presence to embodying value through restraint. You have to become comfortable with not always being needed, not always being seen, not always being immediately responded to, because your value doesn't come from constant visibility. It comes from the weight of your presence when it is felt. And once you understand that, you start operating differently. In conversations, you don't rush to reply. You take your time. You think. You respond with intention, not impulse. In relationships, you don't overextend yourself just to maintain closeness. You allow space, knowing that real connection doesn't need constant maintenance. Even in high-stakes situations, business, negotiations, opportunities, this principle applies. The person who isn't desperate, who isn't constantly available, who doesn't chase, often holds more power, because they can walk away. And that ability, that quiet willingness to step back, signals something powerful. It shows that you have options, that your time isn't dependent on any one person or situation. And people respect that, sometimes unconsciously, but they do. So when you apply this, don't think of it as a tactic. Think of it as alignment. You're aligning your behavior with your value. You're no longer giving unlimited access to something that should be limited: your time, your attention, your presence. You're protecting it. And in doing so, you're not pushing people away. You're inviting them to meet you at a higher level. A level where interaction is chosen, not assumed. Where presence is appreciated, not expected. That's a different kind of connection, a stronger one. So if you take anything from this, let it be this quiet realization. You don't need to be everywhere, all the time, for everyone. You don't need to prove your value through constant availability. In fact, doing less, but with intention, often speaks louder than doing more without it. Let your presence have rhythm. Let it come and go naturally. Let people feel it. And yes, even miss it sometimes. Because in that space, in that slight distance, something important happens. Your value becomes visible again. And once people see it, they start treating you differently. But more importantly, so do you.